No one in Red Willow knew the finest bread in Nebraska came from a woman living under the ground. They ate it warm at supper tables. They bought it wrapped in brown paper from Miller's Mercantile. They praised its crisp crust, its soft middle, and the faint sweetness that made even hard men go quiet after the first bite. But most of them never asked whose hands shaped it before dawn. Caleb Mercer did. And that one question changed two lonely lives forever. The first time Caleb tasted the bread, he was not looking for love, mercy, or anything that could trouble the stillness of his days. He had only come into Red Willow for coffee, lamp oil, and a new hinge for the smokehouse door. He ran the Bar M Ranch 10 miles west of town, a wide, wind-beaten place with cattle enough to keep his hands busy and silence enough to keep his heart shut. At 36, Caleb had the look of a man who had made peace with being alone. His shoulders were broad from work. His face was browned by sun and sharpened by winters. He spoke little, paid fair, and never stayed in town longer than needed. Women had tried to draw him into conversation over the years. Widows had smiled from church steps. Ranchers' daughters had found reasons to pass near his wagon. Caleb answered with politeness, never cruelty, but always with distance. Some folks said his heart had gone cold after his younger brother died in a spring flood. Others said a man who spent that much time with cattle forgot how to live among people. Caleb never corrected them. A quiet man learned early that folks would invent a story if he refused to hand them one. That morning the Mercantile smelled of tobacco, coffee beans, and new cloth. Dust floated through the sunbeams crossing the front window. Mr. Miller stood behind the counter, counting nails into a paper sack while Caleb gathered his supplies. Then Caleb saw the loaf. It sat near the register, round and golden, its crust dark in the right places, with 3 clean cuts across the top. It did not look fancy. It looked honest, like it belonged on a table after a long day's work. Caleb stared at it longer than he meant to. Mr. Miller followed his gaze and smiled. Best bread in the county, came in before sunrise. Caleb picked it up. The loaf was still faintly warm under the paper. Who baked it? Miller shrugged while tying the nail sack. A woman out east of town. She brings some in twice a week. A woman got a name. Clara Whitcomb, Miller said, keeps to herself. Caleb turned the loaf in his hands. Where does she live? Miller's smile faded a little, not from dislike, but from that small town discomfort people wore when kindness had failed and everyone knew it. Past the dry creek bend, in the old sod dugout by Cottonwood Rise. Caleb looked up. A dugout. That's right. Miller lowered his voice, though no one stood close enough to hear. Her father dug it years back when they first settled. After he and her mother passed, Clara stayed. Some women would have married just to get out of that earth hole, but not her. Proud girl, quiet as Sunday snow. Caleb said nothing. He paid for the bread along with the rest of his goods and carried it outside. The town street was bright with late summer sun. Wagon wheels cut slow lines through the dust. A horse stamped near the hitching rail. Somewhere, a woman laughed from behind the dressmaker's window. Caleb stood beside his bay gelding, looking at the loaf in his hand, and felt a strange pull he could not name. He told himself it was only bread. By sundown, that lie had already failed. Back at the Bar M, Caleb ate his supper alone at the kitchen table. The ranch house was large enough for a family, but it held only the sounds of one man moving from room to room. A chair sat empty across from him. It had been empty so long he no longer noticed it most nights. He sliced the heel from the loaf with his pocket knife. The crust broke with a soft crack. Steam rose from the inside, carrying a warm smell of wheat, honey, and wood smoke. Caleb took one bite and stopped moving. It was not just good. It tasted like someone had put patience into it. Like hands had worked sorrow and hope together until they became something that could feed a man. It tasted like a kitchen full of light, though he knew it had come from a dugout in the side of a hill. Caleb lowered the bread to the plate and stared at it. For the first time in years, his house felt too quiet. The next morning, he rode into Red Willow before the sun cleared the roofs. Miller was sweeping the mercantile porch when Caleb stepped down from his horse. "You forget something yesterday?" Miller asked. Caleb held up the remaining half-loaf, wrapped carefully in cloth. "I need to know how to find her." Miller blinked. "Clara. The woman who made this bread." The storekeeper leaned on his broom, studying Caleb's face. Whatever he saw there made him stop teasing. He pointed east, past the church and the last row of small houses. "Take the creek road till the wheel ruts fade. You'll see a lone cottonwood on a rise. Dugout is under it. Smoke comes from the hill when she's baking." Caleb nodded and mounted again. The ride east was quiet. Prairie grass brushed his horse's legs. The sky stretched wide and pale over the land. As town fell behind him, the road became little more than two worn tracks. Caleb passed a broken fence, a dry creek bed, and a patch of sunflowers bending in the wind. Then he saw the smoke. A thin gray line rose from the earth itself. He reined in. At first the place looked like nothing more than a grassy mound pressed into the side of a low hill. Then the details appeared. A wooden door set into packed earth, a little window with a flour sack curtain, a clay oven built outside under a rough shelter of poles and canvas, a stack of split wood, a bucket by the door, a pair of worn women's boots drying in the sun. Caleb dismounted slowly. The smell hit him first. Warm bread, ash, prairie grass, something clean and steady. He walked toward the dugout with his hat in one hand. His boots made soft sounds in the dust. At the open doorway, he stopped. Inside, a woman stood at a wooden table, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands deep in dough. She was not what he expected. Not old, not bent, not the hard-faced widow folks had painted in his mind. She was perhaps 27, with brown hair pinned loosely at the back of her head and a streak of flour along one cheek. Her dress was faded blue, patched at the cuff. Her face was tired but not defeated. There was a quiet strength in the way she stood, as if the whole world had leaned against her and she had learned to lean back. A horse shifted outside. The woman turned. Her gray eyes widened when she saw him in the doorway. For a second, neither of them spoke. The dugout held the silence between them, cool and dim, while sunlight lay across the earthen floor at Caleb's feet. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, sir?" Caleb lifted the wrapped loaf in his hand. "I came from Red Willow," he said. Her face tightened, guarded at once. "If Mr. Miller says the loaves were short, I can bring more tomorrow." "No." Caleb stepped only as far as the threshold, careful not to crowd her. "Nothing was short." She looked from the bread to his face. "Then what is it?" Caleb had asked many questions in his life. Questions about cattle prices, broken fences, missing calves, storm clouds, and debts owed. But standing there before a woman hidden in the earth, with flour on her hands and loneliness tucked behind her eyes, this question felt different. He held up the loaf. "Miss Whitcomb," he said quietly, "who made this bread?" Clara stared at him. The words were simple, but something in his voice made them feel larger than bread. Her fingers curled around the edge of her apron. The wind moved the flour sack curtain behind her, and a soft bar of sunlight touched the side of her face. "I did," she said. Caleb looked at her hands, then at the oven, then back at her. For a moment, he seemed to forget the whole world outside that doorway. And Clara Whitcomb, who had spent years believing no one would ever come looking for the woman beneath the hill, felt her heart give one small, frightened beat of hope. Caleb Mercer had seen men lie over cards, cattle, land, and love. He had seen women smile while hiding grief deep enough to drown in. But he had never seen anyone look as startled by simple praise as Clara Whitcomb did in that dugout doorway. She stood with both hands pressed against her apron, as if the cloth could steady her. Her gray eyes moved from his face to the half-loaf in his hand, then back again. "You rode all this way to ask that," she said. Caleb looked past her shoulder at the small room. The dugout was neat but poor in a way that no sweeping could hide. The bed was narrow. A cracked blue cup sat on a crate beside it. A shawl hung from a peg on the earthen wall. Near the oven, sacks of flour were stacked with careful order, tied tight at the top like treasures. Everything had its place. Everything had been made to last because there was no money to replace what broke. "I rode because I tasted it," he answered. A faint color rose in her cheeks. "It's just bread." "No," he said, "it is." The words settled between them. Clara lowered her eyes first. She turned back to the dough, not rudely, but as if work was the only safe place to put her hands. Her fingers pressed and folded, pressed and folded. Caleb watched the motion. There was strength there and patience, a rhythm earned by years of doing the same thing alone. "I sell to Mr. Miller every Tuesday and Friday," she said. "If you want loaves, you can buy them there." "I want to buy from you." Her hands paused. Outside, the bay gelding snorted and tugged lightly at the reins. The prairie wind pushed dust against Caleb's boots. Clara did not turn around. "That isn't necessary." "Maybe not," Caleb said, "but I'd rather pay the hands that made it." She gave a small laugh, but there was no joy in it. "Most folks don't care whose hands make what they eat, Mr. Mercer." Caleb went still. "You know my name." "Everyone knows your name." She shaped the dough into a smooth round and set it in a bowl. "You own the Bar M." "I run it," he said. "Owning land is not the same as keeping it alive." That made her glance back at him. It was the first look she gave him that was not only guarded. Something in his answer had found a crack in the wall she carried around herself. "My father used to say that," she said quietly, "about land." Caleb heard the shift in her voice. Was this his place? She looked toward the doorway where sunlight cut across the floor. "He dug the first room. Mother lined the shelves with scrap boards. I built the oven after they were gone." "You built that oven?" She lifted her chin a little, brick by brick. Caleb stepped outside and looked at the clay oven under its rough shelter. It was not pretty, but it was well made. The curve was steady. The mouth was clean. The stones around the base were fitted with care. A person could tell much about a soul by the things they built when no one was watching. When he came back to the doorway, Clara was watching him with suspicion and something almost like fear. "You inspect every oven in the county?" she asked. "No," Caleb said. "Only the one that made me ride 10 miles before breakfast." Against herself, Clara almost smiled. It came and went so quickly Caleb might have missed it if he had not been looking, but he saw it. A small softening at the corner of her mouth, a little light through a shutter. He took a folded cloth from his coat pocket and set 2 silver dollars on it, then placed it carefully on the edge of her table. "For what?" she asked. "For today's loaves. I only have 4. "I'll take 4. "That's too much money." "Then bake me more next time." She stared at the coins. 2 silver dollars could buy flour, salt, coffee, maybe even lamp oil without counting every drop. Pride and need fought across her face. Caleb saw it and hated that he had made her choose in front of him. So he looked away and let his gaze rest on the little window instead. "I've got 7 hands at the Bar M, men who eat like wolves and complain like old hens. 4 loaves won't last the supper table." That helped. Her shoulders eased. "I can have 6 ready by Friday," she said. "I'll come Friday." Her eyes snapped to his. "You don't need to. Mr. Miller can send them." "I said I'll come." There was no force in his tone, only calm certainty. Clara did not know what to do with that. Men who spoke softly were not always gentle. She had learned that in town, in church, in the sharp kindness of women who called her poor Clara while looking over her patched sleeves. A soft voice could hide pity. It could hide ownership. It could hide trouble. But Caleb Mercer did not look at her like pity. That was what unsettled her most. He looked as if he had found something valuable and was trying not to frighten it. She wrapped 4 loaves in brown paper and tied them with string. Her fingers trembled once when he reached for the bundle, and his hand stopped short so they would not touch by accident. That small courtesy confused her more than boldness would have. "Thank you, Miss Whitcomb," he said. She nodded. "Good day, Mr. Mercer." Caleb turned to go, then stopped outside the door. There was a loose board above the lintel, hanging slightly away from the frame. The wind lifted it and let it knock once against the side. He looked at it, then at the low roof, then at the narrow ditch where rainwater had carved a path too close to the entrance. Clara saw where his eyes went and stiffened. "It holds," she said quickly. "I didn't say it didn't." "You were thinking it." He looked back at her. "I was thinking the next hard rain will run right into your doorway." Her mouth tightened. "It has before." The words came out too plain. She seemed to regret them at once. Caleb felt something heavy move in his chest. "Who helps you when it does?" "I help myself." "I reckon you do." He said it with respect, not argument. That made her look down again. Caleb wanted to say more. He wanted to ask why no one in Red Willow had fixed a ditch for a woman who fed half their tables. He wanted to ask how long she had been sleeping under a roof that shifted in hard wind. He wanted to ask how a town could praise her bread and still leave her alone in the dirt. But he did not ask. Questions could sound like judgment when a person had survived too much on pride. So he only put his hat back on. "I'll see you Friday," he said. Clara watched him mount his horse. She watched him tuck the bread carefully into his saddlebag, as if it mattered. Then he rode away across the grass, his shadow long in the morning sun. Only after he vanished beyond the dry creek bend did she breathe fully. The dugout felt strange when she stepped back inside. Nothing had changed. The same table, the same walls, the same oven heat pressing against the air. Yet the silence no longer felt settled. It felt disturbed. She went to the table and looked at the silver dollars. They shone brighter than they should have in that dim room. Clara picked one up and held it in her palm. It was warm from the sunlight, heavy and real. Money like that meant food stored before winter. It meant a new hinge. It meant a blanket without holes if she was careful. But it also meant he would come back. That thought frightened her more than hunger. On Friday, Clara woke before dawn and lit the oven with hands that moved faster than usual. She told herself it was because 6 loaves took more work than 4. She told herself the nervous flutter beneath her ribs came from the need to please a new customer. She told herself many things while the sky outside turned from black to silver. By mid-morning, 6 loaves cooled on the rack, each one round, dark, and beautiful. She swept the floor twice. She shook out her apron. She pinned her hair again after one brown strand fell loose. Then she grew angry at herself for caring and pulled the pin out so hard it scratched her scalp. "He wants bread," she whispered to the empty room. "That is all." But when hoofbeats sounded outside, her hand went to her hair anyway. Caleb appeared in the doorway holding not only a clean cloth sack for the loaves, but a small paper packet. Clara's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "Coffee," he said, "from Miller's." "I didn't order coffee." "I know." "Then why bring it?" Caleb looked at the oven, then at her tired eyes. "Because anyone who wakes before sunrise to feed other people ought to have decent coffee." Clara stared at him so long, the packet seemed to grow heavier in his hand. "I don't take charity," she said. "It isn't charity." "What is it then?" He placed it on the table beside the wrapped loaves. "A trade." For what? For 1 cup if you're willing. The dugout went quiet. Clara should have said no. A woman alone did not invite a man to sit. Not a rancher. Not a man with a name folks respected and a house that could swallow her dugout whole. But he had asked as if her answer mattered. He had brought coffee, not flowers. He had looked at her broken doorway and not laughed. She took the packet and turned it in her hand. 1 cup, she said. Caleb stepped inside. Clara set water to boil, feeling the small room become smaller around his presence. He did not crowd her. He leaned against the earth wall near the door, hat in his hands, and waited like a man who understood that trust could not be taken. It had to be given 1 inch at a time. When the coffee was ready, she poured it into the cracked blue cup and a tin one for herself. They stood instead of sitting, because there was only 1 chair and neither wanted to claim it. Caleb drank first. It was strong enough to wake the dead and bitter enough to punish them. He swallowed without complaint. Clara watched him closely, too strong. No, he said, it has character. This time she smiled for real. It changed her whole face. Caleb felt the sight of it like sunlight after a long winter. For a few minutes, they spoke of simple things: flour prices, the dry creek, the first cold wind that would come before October. She told him the oven held heat better if she fired it with cottonwood and cedar mixed. He told her his cook burned biscuits so hard the ranch hands used them to prop open the bunkhouse door. A laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it. Then hoofbeats sounded outside. Not Caleb's horse, more than one. Clara's smile disappeared. Caleb turned toward the doorway. 3 riders slowed near the dugout, their horses raising dust around the oven shelter. At the front sat Roy Haskett, owner of the biggest wheat storehouse in Red Willow and a man Caleb knew by reputation. Smooth coat, clean boots, mean eyes. Roy looked from Caleb to Clara, then smiled in a way that held no warmth. "Well now," he said, "ain't this a cozy little business arrangement?" Clara's face went pale. Caleb set his cup down slowly. And for the first time since he had followed that loaf of bread across the prairie, he understood there was a reason Clara Whitcomb lived alone, where the town could praise her work but never come too close. Roy Haskett sat tall in his saddle, smiling down at Clara Whitcomb as if he had found something that belonged to him. The 2 riders behind him were younger men from his grain yard, broad-shouldered and dull-eyed, the kind who laughed only when someone smaller was made uncomfortable. Their horses shifted in the dust near the oven shelter, too close to the stacked wood, too close to Clara's door. Caleb Mercer did not move fast. He only turned fully toward the entrance and stood between Clara and the riders without making a show of it. Roy noticed. His smile sharpened. "Morning, Mercer. Didn't expect to find you tucked away out here." "I came for bread," Caleb said. Roy looked at the wrapped loaves on the table, then at the 2 cups of coffee. "Looks like you came for more than bread." Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. "What do you want, Mr. Haskett?" Roy gave her a wounded look that did not touch his eyes. "Now, Clara, is that any way to greet a man who's kept flour in your barrel all these years?" Caleb glanced at Clara. She stared at the dirt floor. Something passed across her face. Shame, anger, fear. Not the fear of a weak person, but the fear of someone who knew exactly how quickly a man with power could make a life smaller. Roy leaned forward over his saddle horn. "I came to remind you of our little talk from last week. Wheat prices are rising. Flour doesn't fall from heaven. If you mean to keep buying on my account, I'll need a proper answer." "I paid what I owed," Clara said. "You paid coin for the last sack, not for the one before it, not for the delivery I made in April, not for the favor I did you when Miller wouldn't advance you another pound." Clara's face flushed. "Mr. Miller would have advanced it. You told him not to." Roy laughed softly. Now why would I do a thing like that? Because you wanted her cornered, Caleb thought. He felt the old anger wake in him, the kind he had learned to keep behind his teeth. It was the anger that came when a calf was found tangled in wire because a lazy hand had left a gate wrong. The anger that came when floodwater took his brother while men stood on the bank shouting instead of throwing rope. Useless anger helped no one. Steady anger could build a bridge, cut a fence, or put a bully back in his place. Caleb chose steady. "What answer are you asking her for?" he said. Roy's eyes slid to him. "Private matter." "Doesn't sound private. You rode up with witnesses." One of Roy's men snickered, then stopped when Caleb looked at him. Roy's jaw tightened. "Miss Whitcomb and I have an understanding." "No, we don't," Clara said. Her voice was small, but it did not break. Roy turned his gaze back on her. "Careful now. Pride is expensive when winter's coming." The words hit the dugout like a cold wind. Caleb stepped outside. The sun fell hard on his shoulders. Dust moved around his boots. He walked only a few paces, enough to stand in the open, close enough for Clara to hear everything, but far enough that Roy had to look down at him no longer. "What does she owe?" Caleb asked. Clara came quickly to the doorway. "Mr. Mercer, don't." He did not turn, but his voice softened for her. "I'm only asking the amount." Roy smiled again, thinking he understood. "Well, now that depends. Coin debt, delivery debt, interest for trouble, damage to good business reputation." "Amount," Caleb repeated. Roy studied him, then named a figure high enough to buy flour for half the county. Clara made a sound under her breath. "That is not true." Roy shrugged. "Paper says it is." "Show it," Caleb said. For the first time, Roy's smile faltered. He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He did not hand it to Caleb. He waved it once, as if the sight of it was enough. Caleb held out his hand. "If it's honest, let me read it." Roy's eyes cooled. "You always stick your nose in women's kitchen troubles." "No," Caleb said, "only when men bring trouble to their doors." The younger riders shifted, uneasy now. There were men a body could push. Caleb Mercer was not one of them. He did not bluster, and that made him more dangerous in a quiet way, not because he would start violence, but because he would not scare. Roy tucked the paper back into his coat. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me if I buy her bread for my ranch." "Then buy it through town." "I won't." Roy's mouth flattened. Behind Caleb, Clara stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. The loose board above her head knocked once in the wind. She looked as if she wanted to disappear back into the earth and never be seen again, but she did not move. Caleb admired that more than he could say. Roy tipped his hat toward her. "You think on what I said. A woman can't live on stubbornness." Clara's chin lifted. "Then it's good I have bread." Caleb almost smiled. Roy did not. His horse turned sharply under the pull of his reins. The two men followed him, but not before one of them spat near Clara's stacked wood. Caleb watched them ride away until they became dark shapes on the road back to town. Only then did he turn. Clara had already gone inside. He found her at the table, untying and retying the same string around a loaf with hands that would not stay still. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For that, for him, for bringing trouble into your business." "You didn't bring trouble." "He will." She looked up then, and her eyes were bright but dry. "You do know Roy Haskett." "I know his kind." "No," she said, sharper now. "You know men who push cattle prices and cheat at cards. You don't know men who make a whole town look away." Caleb was quiet. The words cost her. He could see it in the way her shoulders rose and fell, in the way she pressed her fingers flat against the table as if holding herself to the ground. "What does he want from you?" Caleb asked. Clara looked toward the oven. Sunlight trembled across the clay curve. The oven. Caleb frowned. Your oven. My bread. Her voice turned bitter. My recipe. My work. He wants me baking for his storehouse under his name. Says he'll put me in a back room behind the grain office. Says I can pay my debts by working there until he decides I've paid enough. And if you refuse? He tells Miller not to buy from me. He tells women in town my flour is old. He tells the church ladies it isn't proper to buy food from a woman living alone. He tells every man with a wagon that my road is not worth the trouble. Caleb felt his hands close slowly. Clara saw and shook her head. Don't be angry for me. Why not? Because anger is easy when you can ride away from the person you're angry at. I still have to live here. That stopped him. It was not a coward's answer. It was the answer of someone who had measured every consequence. Caleb took off his hat and set it on the table. How much do you truly owe? Clara looked at the $2 silver still lying on the folded cloth from his first visit. Less than, he said, but more than I can pay before winter if he cuts off my buyers. I'll pay it. No. I can. I said no. Her voice came hard enough to fill the little room. Caleb held her gaze. Pride won't keep him from your door. No, she said, but if you pay him, he'll own the story. By sunset, he'll tell Red Willow I needed a rancher to settle my debts. By Sunday, they'll say you bought me along with the bread. The truth of it sat heavy between them. Caleb looked around the dugout again. The poor bed, the patched shawl, the flour sacks, the oven outside. He had come here because of bread, but each visit uncovered something deeper. Clara was not merely alone. She had been placed there by a town that liked her work better than her company and by a man who saw her need as a rope. He wanted to cut that rope. But he was beginning to understand that Clara would not thank any man for cutting it, in a way that left her hands empty. What do you want? He asked. The question surprised her. She looked almost lost. What? What do you want done? No one had asked her that in a long while. People told her what she should accept, where she should live, whom she should trust, what she should be grateful for. No one asked what she wanted. Her throat moved. I want to sell my bread without asking permission from Roy Haskett. Caleb nodded once. Then that's where we start. Wait. He picked up his hat. If you'll allow it. She studied him carefully, searching for pity, control, or pride dressed as help. She found something else. Patience. What do you mean? She asked. I've got 23 men at the bar M, counting seasonal hands. They need bread. I've got neighbors west of here who would buy good loaves if they knew where to find them. I can pay fair and take delivery myself until we set a better way. Her mouth parted slightly. That much bread would take flour. I can buy flour from Omaha through my cattle freight. I won't take free supplies. Then I'll charge them against the order like any supplier would. She narrowed her eyes. At a fair price. At the price I pay. And I keep my recipe. It's yours. And no one calls it bar M bread. Caleb's face softened. What would you call it? Clara looked toward the oven again. The wind moved the smoke in a long, thin ribbon above it. For years, her bread had left her hands with no name, no mark, no sign that she had ever touched it. It had fed people who never pictured her face. Cottonwood Hearth, she said before she could lose courage. Caleb repeated it quietly. Cottonwood Hearth bread. Hearing him say it made her eyes sting. She turned away at once and began moving bowls that did not need moving. It's only a thought. It's a good name. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and bright, but the little dugout felt different now. Not safe exactly, not yet, but less forgotten. Caleb gathered the 6 loaves and tied them into his saddlebag. Before leaving, he stopped at the doorframe and looked up at the loose board. "I'll bring tools next time," he said. Clara folded her arms. "For the board. And the rain ditch." "I didn't agree to that." "No," he said, putting on his hat, "but you didn't refuse fast enough." For a second, she tried not to smile. This time she failed. Caleb rode away with the bread, and Clara stood watching until he crossed the dry creek bend. Then she went back inside and wrote the name on a scrap of flour paper with a dull pencil. Cottonwood Hearth bread. Her hand trembled when she finished. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Clara and Caleb's story, because sometimes the first step toward freedom is not a grand speech. Sometimes it is simply hearing your own name spoken with respect. That evening, Roy Haskett sat in his grain office with the folded paper spread before him. A lantern burned low on his desk. Beside the false debt note lay another document, older and marked with Clara's father's signature. Roy tapped one finger against it, smiling to himself. Clara thought he wanted the oven. She did not know he wanted the land beneath it. The next morning, Clara Whitcomb woke before the rooster at the far Miller place had begun to complain. She lay still on her narrow bed, listening to the dugout breathe around her. Earth walls held the night cool. A small draft slipped under the door and touched the hem of her blanket. Outside, the cottonwood leaves whispered above the hill like someone turning pages in the dark. For one strange, foolish moment, she thought of the name on the flour paper. Cottonwood Hearth bread. She had placed the scrap under the cracked blue cup before sleeping, as if hiding it could protect it. But the words had followed her into dreams. In them, loaves sat in rows on a proper table, each wrapped with a neat paper band bearing that name. Men and women bought them without pity in their eyes. Children carried them home against their chests, and when someone asked who made them, no one whispered "Poor Clara." They simply said her name. She sat up and rubbed her face with both hands. Dreams were dangerous before sunrise. They looked almost true in the soft dark. By the time the oven was hot, Clara had worked the foolishness out of her arms. Dough under her palms steadied her. Flour dusted the table. Fire warmed the shelter. The first orange line of morning lifted over the prairie, turning the grass silver at the edges. She shaped 20 loaves instead of 6, because Caleb had said he knew buyers, and because she had decided not to insult hope by preparing too little for it. Still, fear stood beside her like an unwanted guest. What if Caleb changed his mind? What if he decided it was too much trouble? What if Roy Haskett heard of the new orders and made good on his threat before she could earn enough to stand straight? She pressed her fingers deep into the dough. The bread did not answer, it only rose. Near mid-morning, hoofbeats came from the west. Clara stepped out from under the oven shelter, wiping flour from her wrists. Caleb rode up with 2 pack horses behind him, both carrying flour sacks and a long canvas bundle. He wore his usual dark hat, his blue shirt open at the throat from the heat, and his face looked as calm as if he were only delivering fence nails. But Clara saw the careful way his eyes moved over the dugout first. The roof, the doorframe, the ditch, the road. He was checking whether trouble had come in the night. That touched her more than she wanted it to. "You brought half a freight wagon," she said. Caleb swung down from the saddle, "only what was needed." That sounds like a rancher's way of saying too much. He glanced toward the cooling loaves. "And that looks like a baker's way of saying she believes me." Clara had no answer for that. He untied the first flour sack and carried it near the oven shelter. The muscles in his forearms tightened under the weight, but he set it down gently as if her supplies were not sacks but sleeping children. Then he opened his ledger and showed her the numbers. Flour cost, salt cost, coffee cost, though she had not asked for it, payment due for the first bar M order. No tricks, no favor hidden like a hook under bait. Clara studied the page, then looked up. "You wrote Cottonwood Hearth." "I did." "Why?" You named it. It was only a thought. Good things often start that way. His voice was plain, but the words settled warmly inside her. Together they counted the loaves and wrapped them. Clara had never worked with someone standing so close without feeling watched. Caleb did not hover. He did not correct. He followed her lead. When she handed him string, he tied. When she reached for paper, he passed it before she asked. When a loaf cracked at the side, she set it aside with embarrassment, but he picked it up and smiled faintly. "That one stays with me," he said. "It isn't fit for selling." "I'm not selling it. It's ugly. So are half my steers. They still serve a purpose." A laugh escaped her before she could press it down. The sound surprised them both. For a breath, the dugout yard seemed brighter. Then a wagon creaked on the road from town. Clara's laugh died. A small open wagon rolled toward the Cottonwood rise, driven by Mrs. Martha Bell, the church seamstress, with two other women seated stiffly beside her. Their bonnets were tied under their chins, their faces arranged in the solemn expression women wore when they came pretending concern and carrying judgment. Caleb looked at Clara. "Do you want me to stay?" She swallowed. "If you leave, they will say worse." "If I stay, they may say worse." Clara looked down at her apron, then at the loaves stacked between them. "They already say enough." The wagon stopped near the oven. Mrs. Bell climbed down first, smoothing her skirt as though the prairie dust had personally offended her. She was not cruel in the loud way Roy was cruel. Hers was the gentler cruelty of someone who believed she was always helping. "Clara dear," she called, "we thought we ought to come by." Clara stepped forward, mourning Mrs. Bell. The older woman's eyes moved quickly over Caleb, the pack horses, the flour sacks, the wrapped bread, and the doorway of the dugout. Her mouth tightened. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Caleb tipped his hat. "Mrs. Bell." One of the women in the wagon leaned toward the other and whispered. Clara heard nothing, yet felt every word. Mrs. Bell folded her gloved hands. "There has been talk." Clara wanted to vanish. Instead, she stood still. "There is always talk," Caleb said. Mrs. Bell gave him a strained smile. "Yes, well, some talk is born from concern. A woman living alone must be mindful of appearances. And now with Mr. Haskett saying there are debts, and with you coming here so often, Clara, folks are beginning to wonder whether this bread business is becoming something improper." The word hung in the sunlight. Improper. Clara felt heat crawl up her neck. She had spent years breaking her back to remain respectable enough for the town to use, but not close enough for them to claim. She delivered bread before sunrise so no one had to look too long at her patched dress. She kept her eyes down in church. She paid every coin she could. And still, one man's lie could stain her, while his own hands stayed clean. Caleb's face did not change, but his voice lowered. "Mrs. Bell, did Roy Haskett send you?" The women stiffened. Mrs. Bell blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Did he send you to warn Miss Whitcomb away from selling her own bread?" "This is not about business." "It seems to be exactly about business." Clara touched Caleb's sleeve lightly, a warning, a plea. He stopped. That small touch ran through him, with a force he hid behind stillness. Clara stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "Mrs. Bell, I have done nothing wrong. Mr. Mercer is buying bread for his ranch. I am paying for supplies. I owe Mr. Haskett less than he says, and I will settle the true amount in front of witnesses when I have the money." Mrs. Bell looked uncomfortable now. One of the women in the wagon would not meet Clara's eyes. "My dear, we only want to protect you." Clara smiled sadly. "Then buy a loaf." The word surprised everyone. Even Caleb turned his head. Clara walked to the table, took one fresh loaf, wrapped it in paper and held it out. Her hand trembled, but she did not lower it. "You came all the way here," she said. Buy one, taste it, then tell the town whether my hands are shameful." Mrs. Bell stared at the loaf as if it were a challenge. Maybe it was. The prairie wind moved through the cottonwood leaves. Caleb stood silent, letting Clara hold the moment herself. No man could give a woman her dignity by speaking over her. He understood that now. He had to stand close enough to be steady, far enough not to take her place. At last, Mrs. Bell opened her purse. The coin she placed in Clara's palm was small, but it sounded loud when it touched her skin. "I never said your hands were shameful," she murmured. "No," Clara said softly, "but you listened when someone else did." Mrs. Bell's face changed, just a little, not enough to mend years, enough to begin. The wagon left with 3 loaves instead of 1. The women rode away quieter than they had arrived. Clara stood watching until the dust settled. Then her knees weakened. Caleb reached out but did not catch her unless she needed it. She steadied herself against the table and let out a breath that trembled. "I should not have said that," she whispered. "Yes," Caleb said, "you should have." She looked at him then, and the guard in her eyes had shifted. Not gone, but changed. As if she had opened one small window and found the air outside did not kill her. The rest of the day passed in work. Caleb loaded bread onto the pack horses. Clara marked each bundle with a charcoal C and H, clumsy but clear. He widened the rain ditch with a shovel after she pretended not to notice. Then, without asking, he repaired the loose board above the door. When he finished, the frame sat square, and the door closed without groaning. Clara stood beside him in the late afternoon light. "You keep fixing things," she said. "I know how." "That isn't what I meant." He turned to her. Her face was tired from the long day, flour still on one cheek, hair slipping loose at her neck. But there was life in her eyes now, and it pulled at him harder than beauty ever had. Caleb leaned one hand against the repaired frame. "Then say what you mean." She looked down at his hand, strong, scarred, patient. "I mean, I don't know what you expect in return." The honesty of it cut him. He moved his hand from the frame and stepped back, giving her space. "Bread," he said. She gave him a look. He almost smiled. "For now." "For now." "For as long as that is all you want to give." The answer left her quiet. Not because it was grand, because it was the first answer that did not push. When Caleb rode away near dusk, Clara watched from the doorway of the dugout. The repaired board no longer knocked above her head. The ditch lay clean in the dirt, ready for rain. On the table behind her, more coins rested than she had seen in months. Under the cracked blue cup, the flour paper with Cottonwood Hearth bread no longer felt like a dream. It felt like a beginning. But in Red Willow, beginnings did not stay private for long. By nightfall, the 3 loaves bought by Mrs. Bell had been sliced at 3 different supper tables. The talk that followed did not go the way Roy Haskett had planned. By the next morning, 5 women wanted bread. By noon, the schoolteacher wanted 6 for a social. By sundown, Miller's Mercantile had a line asking when Clara Whitcomb's next delivery would come. And Roy Haskett, standing behind the counter of his grain office, listened to each report with a face gone hard as winter ground. He opened the old land paper again. This time he did not smile. He reached for his ink pen and wrote one word across the top. Eviction. The word eviction did not reach Clara Whitcomb as a word at first. It reached her as silence. For 2 days after Mrs. Bell's visit, Red Willow changed its manner toward her in small, uneasy ways. Mr. Miller stood straighter when she entered the Mercantile, and no longer spoke over her shoulder as if she were passing through someone else's life. The schoolteacher, Miss Addie Cole, came herself to the dugout and ordered bread for the children's autumn social, counting the coins into Clara's palm with a warm smile. Even the blacksmith's wife stopped her outside the store and said, "My husband ate half a loaf before supper and asked if I had been hiding a better baker from him." Clara had not known what to do with that. Praise was easier when it came from a distance. Close up, it made her feel as if someone had opened the door to a room she had kept locked. She thanked people softly, kept her eyes steady, and walked home with her basket light and her chest heavy. By Saturday morning, Cottonwood Hearth bread had orders enough to keep her hands busy from dark to dark. Caleb came at dawn with flour, salt, and a new stack of brown paper cut clean for wrapping. He also brought a small branding stamp made from carved wood, with the letters C and H burned into the end. Clara held it like something fragile. "You had this made?" she asked. "Made it myself last night." "You carved letters." "Poorly." She pressed the stamp into a scrap of paper. The mark came out uneven but clear. Cottonwood Hearth had a sign now, small as it was. Her throat tightened. She turned away before he could see too much in her face, pretending to check the oven. "You should have slept." "I did." "You look tired." "So do you." "That is different." "Why?" She glanced back. Caleb stood beside the table, sleeves rolled, dust on his boots, his hat pushed back just enough for the morning light to catch his eyes. He was not smiling, but there was a gentleness in him that made the room feel warmer. "Because this is my work," she said. "And helping you is mine today." She wanted to argue, but the loaves were rising fast, the orders were many, and her pride had already learned that Caleb's help did not come with a chain, so she handed him the string. They worked side by side for hours. The dugout yard filled with the smell of bread. Smoke curled from the oven. Horses shifted under the cottonwood. Caleb wrapped loaves while Clara shaped more dough, and each time he marked the paper with the wooden stamp, the letters C and H appeared like proof that something hidden had stepped into daylight. Near noon, a boy rode up from town with a note tucked under his hatband. He was the telegraph clerk's youngest brother, all elbows and freckles, riding a mule too stubborn to hurry. "Miss Whitcomb," he called. Clara wiped her hands. "Yes." He hopped down and handed her the folded paper. "Sheriff Lane said to bring this straight, said it's official." The word official drained the warmth from the morning. Caleb set down the loaf he was wrapping. Clara unfolded the paper slowly. Her eyes moved across the lines once, then again. The color left her face. Caleb stepped closer. "Clara." She did not answer. She held the paper out with fingers gone stiff. He took it and read. By order of claim review, Clara Whitcomb was to vacate the dugout and adjoining rise within 7 days, unless proof of legal ownership could be presented before the county office. The land, the paper said, had been pledged years before by her father against grain debt to Haskett Milling and Storage. Caleb read the last line twice. Failure to comply would result in removal of goods, oven, and dwelling rights. For a moment, the only sound was the fire shifting in the oven. The boy looked from Clara to Caleb, then down at his boots. "Sheriff said he didn't write it, just had to deliver." Caleb folded the paper carefully, though his hands wanted to crush it. "Tell Sheriff Lane we received it," he said. The boy nodded, climbed back onto the mule, and rode off faster than he had come. Clara stood in the yard like the ground had opened beneath her. 7 days. The dugout behind her was poor. The roof leaked in hard weather. The window was small. The walls smelled of earth after rain. But it was the last place her mother had sung while kneading dough. The last place her father had sat with a tin cup of coffee and said the hill would shelter them if they respected it. The oven outside had been built after their deaths, when grief had left Clara with no one to hold, so she had shaped clay and brick into something that could keep her alive. Now Roy Haskett wanted even that. Caleb looked at her face, and understood what no paper could say. This was not only land. This was memory. "Do you have your father's deed?" he asked gently. Clara swallowed. There was a deed. "Where?" "In my mother's trunk." She turned at once and went inside. Caleb followed only to the doorway. He would not enter when she was pulling open grief. Inside, Clara dragged a small wooden trunk from beneath the bed. Its iron corners were rusted, and one hinge hung crooked. She knelt before it, lifted the lid, and began sorting through folded cloth, old letters, a small Bible, a dried ribbon, and 2 photographs wrapped in muslin. Her hands moved quickly at first, then with growing panic. "It was here," she whispered. "I saw it after Father died. I know I did." Caleb waited. She searched again, then again. At last she sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Papers lay scattered around her like fallen leaves. "It's gone." The words came out hollow. Caleb stepped inside then, slowly. "Could your father have pledged the land?" "No," she shook her head hard. "Not the hill, never the hill." "Are you certain?" Her eyes flashed. He would have sold his boots before risking this place. Caleb believed her. Not because sorrow made people honest. Sorrow could twist memory. He believed her because of the way she had built her life around that land. A child knew the shape of a parent's promises. Some things were spoken so often they became the walls of a home. Clara picked up an old photograph. A man and woman stood outside the dugout years earlier, younger than Clara was now, with a little girl between them. Her father's hand rested on the child's shoulder. Her mother's eyes were soft, tired, proud. "I told myself I stayed because I had nowhere else," Clara said. "But that wasn't the whole truth." Caleb crouched a few feet away, not touching her, only listening. "I stayed because leaving felt like burying them twice." The confession came quiet as dust. Caleb's face changed. The hardness Roy had put there faded into something deeper. "You won't lose it without a fight," he said. "I have no deed." "We find proof." "Where?" "County records, your father's papers, anyone who witnessed the claim, anyone who remembers." Clara looked at the eviction notice in his hand. "Roy has a paper." "Roy has a paper he wouldn't show me. That's not the same as truth." The word steadied her, but only a little. Truth, she had learned, did not always win in a room full of men who owed favors to one another. By late afternoon, the bread was finished, but neither of them had eaten. Caleb loaded the orders for town while Clara wrapped the last of the loaves with movements that looked calm only because she forced them to. Each paper bore the crooked C and H stamp. Cottonwood Hearth. A name born in hope, now threatened before it had stood a week. Caleb tied the final sack closed. "I'll ride to the county office." "It's closed by now." "Then I'll be there when it opens." "Caleb." It was the first time she said his name without thinking. He turned. She heard it after it left her mouth and looked startled by her own courage. The sun was lowering behind him, setting his shoulders in gold. "If Roy owns this land, no order from you will change that," she said. "I don't give orders to the law." "Then what will you do?" "I'll ask questions." She gave a small, sad laugh. "That seems to be how this started." "Yes," he said, "and I'm not done." He stepped closer, stopping before he came too near. "Listen to me, Clara. A man like Roy counts on folks getting tired, ashamed, or scared before the truth is found, so we won't get tired. You hear me?" Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She had been brave alone for so long that shared courage felt almost unbearable. Before he left, he took one loaf from the table and handed it back to her. "This one stays here," he said. "For what?" "For supper. You baked all day and didn't eat enough." She looked at the loaf in her hands, then at him. A soft YouTube moment belongs here, because if you believe a woman's work deserves her own name and her own place in the world, stay with this story. Clara's fight is just beginning, and the truth under that hill has not yet been uncovered. Caleb rode to town with the orders as dusk fell. Clara watched him go, holding the loaf against her apron like a warm stone. That night, Red Willow ate Cottonwood Hearth bread at supper tables lit by lanterns. In the sheriff's office, Caleb Mercer stood before Sheriff Tom Lane and placed the eviction notice flat on the desk. Sheriff Lane read it with tired eyes and sighed. "I was hoping she'd find the deed." "So you knew?" "I knew Haskett filed a claim." "Do you believe it?" The sheriff leaned back. "What I believe and what paper proves are two different things." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Where are the old land records kept?" "County office. But that claim goes back near 12 years. Records from that year got damaged in the courthouse stove fire." Caleb's heart sank. Sheriff Lane lowered his voice. "There may be another way. Clara's father had a witness when he filed his original claim. Old Elijah Boone used to survey land before his eyes went bad." "Where is he?" The sheriff looked toward the dark window. "3 counties south, last I heard. Living near the Platte with his daughter. But Mercer, if you're going after him, go quick." Caleb picked up his hat. Outside, the night had turned cold. Far east of town, Clara sat inside the dugout beside her parents' open trunk. She unfolded one letter after another, searching by lantern light until her eyes burned. Near midnight, beneath the torn lining of the trunk lid, her fingertips found a hidden slit. Inside was a small cloth pouch. And in that pouch was not the deed. It was a wedding ring she had never seen before, wrapped with a note in her father's handwriting. Clara opened the note with trembling hands. The first line read, "If Haskett ever comes for the hill, trust no paper he brings." Clara Whitcomb read the first line 3 times before the words made sense. "If Haskett ever comes for the hill, trust no paper he brings." The lantern flame trembled beside her, bending every shadow in the dugout. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwood branches above the roof, and the old earth walls seemed to press closer around her. Her father's handwriting crawled across the page in dark, careful strokes, each letter familiar enough to hurt. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, the small cloth pouch open in her lap. Inside lay the ring. It was not fine enough for a wealthy woman, just a simple gold band, worn thin on one side, the kind a man might buy after saving coin in secret for months. Clara turned it between her fingers, confused by the sight of it. Her mother had worn no ring after Clara was old enough to remember. Clara had thought it had been lost in the hard years, traded for flour or medicine or seed. But here it was, hidden inside the trunk lid. She lifted the note again. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then your mother and I are no longer able to stand between you and the troubles we feared. I pray that day never comes. But if it does, remember this first. Cottonwood Rise belongs to you." Clara stopped breathing for a moment. The paper shook. "Your mother's brother, Daniel Pike, helped me file the claim in Kearney before you were born. Elijah Boone surveyed it. Haskett wanted the spring line even then. He offered credit when drought came, and I took some like a fool, but I never pledged the hill. I never signed away your mother's home. If a paper says I did, it is false or altered." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. All those years, every cruel whisper about debt, every hard look Roy gave her across the mercantile counter, every time she had counted coins until her eyes burned, he had known. He had known the hill was hers. He had been waiting for fear to do what law could not. The note continued. "There is one proof I could not keep in the trunk. Too many eyes watched me near the end. I gave it to the person least likely to be searched. Find Mary Ellen Boone. She will know what was kept and why. If Elijah still lives, he can speak to the survey. If not, Mary Ellen has what matters. Your mother asked me to leave her ring for you. She said when you felt alone, you should hold it and remember that this ground was not given by mercy. It was earned by love, labor, and law. Do not let Haskett shame you off it. Your loving father, Samuel Whitcomb. By the time Clara finished, her face was wet. She had not cried when the eviction notice came. She had not cried when Roy threatened her. She had not cried during the lean winters when her hands cracked open from cold and flour dust. But now, holding proof that her father had seen this darkness coming, the tears came so silently they startled her. She curled over the note and ring as if protecting them from the room itself. "I knew you wouldn't," she whispered. The words were for her father. They were also for the child she had been, the little girl in the old photograph standing between two tired parents outside the dugout. A girl who had believed her father could fix any hinge, mend any harness, and make any fear smaller by putting his hand on her shoulder. For years, Clara had been angry at him in secret, angry that he died leaving debts, angry that he left her in a hill instead of a house, angry that she had to become hard before she was ready. Now she saw that he had left more than hardship. He had left warning. He had left a path. Before dawn, Clara had packed the note, the ring, and the cloth pouch inside her dress pocket. She did not sleep. She washed her face in cold water, tied her hair tight, and lit the oven because orders still had to be filled even when a person's world had turned over in the night. Work first, fear later. That had been her rule since 17. But by sunrise, when hoofbeats came fast from the west, her heart knew the sound before she stepped outside. Caleb rode in hard, his bay damp at the neck, a bedroll strapped behind the saddle. His eyes searched her face the moment he saw her. "You found something," he said. Clara stared at him. "How did you know?" "You're standing like a woman with a secret, instead of a woman with a sentence." The words almost made her smile, but the night had left her too raw. She pulled the note from her pocket and handed it to him. Caleb read it standing beneath the cottonwood, hat low, jaw set. He took his time, not because he was slow, but because he respected paper that carried a dead man's truth. When he reached the end, he folded it along the same creases and handed it back. "Mary Ellen Boone," he said. Clara nodded. "My father says she has proof. Sheriff Lane told me Elijah Boone may be living near the Platte with his daughter. That must be her." "You were already going." "I was leaving this morning." "I'm coming with you." Caleb looked at her. The answer in him was no, not because he thought her weak, but because the road was long, Roy was watching, and trouble had a way of finding women faster than men admitted. But he saw her face before the word formed. Clara was not asking to be carried into her own fight. She was claiming the right to stand in it. So he changed the shape of his answer. "We leave after you bank the oven." She blinked. "You're not going to argue." "I was considering it. And I like winning arguments. I doubt I'd win this one." This time she did smile, though it was tired and small. By mid-morning they had loaded 2 loaves, coffee, a blanket, and the little pouch with the ring and note. Clara locked the dugout door, then stood before it longer than needed. The repaired frame held steady in the wind. The clay oven cooled under its shelter. The cottonwood leaves flickered silver above the roof. 7 days. If they failed, she might return to find a notice nailed to that door, or worse, Roy's men waiting with a wagon. Caleb saw the thought cross her face. "We'll come back before he can move." "What if the law lets him?" "Then we bring truth louder than his paper." She looked at him. "Truth is not always loud." "No," he said, "but people can be." They rode south with the morning sun behind them. Clara had not traveled beyond Red Willow in years. The prairie opened around her in long waves of grass, broken by creek beds and lonely fence posts. Meadowlarks flashed yellow in the weeds. The wind pulled strands of hair loose from under her hat. Riding beside Caleb felt strange, not improper, not exactly safe either. Just new, like stepping onto a frozen creek and hearing no crack. For a long while they said little. Near noon, they stopped by a shallow stream to water the horses. Caleb handed her one of the loaves and cut slices with his knife. They ate sitting on opposite sides of a cottonwood stump, close enough to talk, far enough for the silence to remain decent. Clara looked at the bread in her hand. My mother's ring was in the trunk all this time. Caleb waited. I used to think she sold it, Clara continued. When flour ran out, or when father took ill, I was ashamed of thinking it, but I did. Hard years make a person believe hard things. She wanted me to have it. She did. Clara rubbed her thumb against the crust of the bread. I don't remember her voice clearly anymore. That frightens me more than I like to admit. Caleb looked across the stream. Sunlight broke over the water in small, bright pieces. I remember my brother's laugh, but not his last words. Some days I hate myself for it. Clara lifted her eyes. It was the first time he had spoken of that wound. What was his name? She asked softly. Nathan. The name came rough. He was younger. 7 years, too quick with jokes, too careless near water, too alive for the world to keep, I suppose. What happened? Caleb picked up a pebble and turned it in his palm. Spring flood. We were moving calves from the low pasture. The creek rose faster than we thought. A heifer got caught in brush. Nathan went in after her rope. Water took him off his feet. Clara said nothing. I was on the bank, Caleb continued. I had a rope in my hand I threw too late. His voice did not break. That made it worse. Clara understood then that Caleb's quiet was not emptiness. It was a room full of things he had locked away, because no one could survive a working day if grief kept walking out in front of him. You were his brother, she said, not God. Caleb looked at her. No one had said it that plainly before. They had offered softer words, kinder words, words about fate and the Lord's will and time healing what it never truly touched. But Clara's words landed firm as a hand on his shoulder. Not God. Just his brother. His throat tightened, he looked away. She did not reach for him. She only sat with him in the quiet, and somehow that was more comfort than touch might have been. They rode on. By late afternoon, clouds gathered low in the west. The road became muddy near a small crossing, and Clara's horse slipped once before catching itself. Caleb guided them toward an abandoned line shack he knew from old cattle routes. It stood crooked beside a windbreak of cottonwoods, its roof patched with tin, its inside dry enough for one night. We'll wait the rain out here, he said. Clara looked at the dark sky. Will we lose time? Less than if a horse goes lame. Inside the shack, dust lay thick on the floor. Caleb cleared a place near the wall while Clara unpacked bread and coffee. Rain began just as he brought the saddles under cover. It struck the tin roof in hard, scattered beats, then grew steady. The shack smelled of old smoke and wet leather. Clara sat on a folded blanket, knees drawn slightly close, listening to the rain. For the first time all day, fear returned. Not fear of Caleb, but of the world beyond the shack. Roy's paper. 7 days. A hidden proof they might not find. A town that could turn again if the wind shifted. Caleb sat near the doorway, watching the rain fall in silver lines. You're thinking of the hill, he said. I'm thinking of what I become if I lose it. You don't become less. You don't know that. I know enough. She looked at him, tired and sharp. Because you tasted my bread. No, he said, because I've seen what you do when men try to scare you. I've seen you stand in a doorway with your voice shaking and still speak. I've seen you turn judgment into customers. I've seen you name your work when the town only named your poverty." Clara looked down. The rain filled the pause. Caleb's voice softened. "The hill matters, I know it does. But Clara, it isn't the only thing your parents left you." Her fingers curled around her mother's ring inside her pocket. The lantern between them threw a warm circle of light across the floor. The storm made the world outside disappear. In that small broken shack, with bread wrapped between them and truth folded in her pocket, Clara felt something inside her shift. For years, she had believed survival meant needing no one. Now she feared that needing someone might be its own kind of courage. She looked across the lantern light at Caleb. "You asked me what I wanted," she said. "I remember. I want my land." Her voice trembled. "I want my name on my bread. I want Roy Haskett to stop making me feel like I should apologize for staying alive." Caleb held her gaze. "And after that?" he asked. The question was gentle, but it found the hidden place she had not dared touch. "After the land, after the debt, after the fight." "What then?" Clara opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a horse whinnied outside. Caleb rose at once and moved to the door. Through the rain, a lantern bobbed between the trees. Then a man's voice called out from the dark. "Mercer, I know you're in there. Haskett sent word ahead. Says the woman with you is carrying stolen papers." Clara's hand closed around the pouch in her pocket. Caleb stood in the doorway, rain blowing across his coat, and reached slowly for the lantern. The fight for Cottonwood Rise had followed them into the storm. Caleb Mercer did not step out into the rain right away. He stood in the doorway of the crooked line shack with one hand around the lantern handle and the other hanging still at his side. Water streamed from the tin roof in bright lines, hissing in the mud below. The horses shifted under the cottonwoods, nervous from the stranger's voice and the storm pushing through the trees. Behind him, Clara Whitcomb had gone silent. That worried Caleb more than if she had cried out. "Who's there?" Caleb called. The lantern outside lifted higher. A man rode into the weak circle of light, hunched under a slicker, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He was thick through the chest, with a beard cut close along his jaw and a tin star pinned crooked to his coat. Caleb knew him. Deputy Amos Reed from Ellery Crossing, a town 2 ridges south. A man who liked being obeyed more than he liked being right. 2 other riders waited behind him, shapes in the rain. Deputy Reed reined in near the shack. "Caleb Mercer, step aside and send the woman out." Caleb's face did not change. "You're a long way from Ellery. County line don't matter when stolen property crosses it." "What stolen property?" "The papers she took from Roy Haskett's office." Inside the shack, Clara's hand tightened around the pouch in her pocket until the edge of the ring pressed into her palm. "I took nothing from Roy," she said. Her voice carried through the rain, steady enough to make Deputy Reed look past Caleb into the shack. "Well, Miss Whitcomb," Reed said, "then you won't mind being searched." Caleb stepped farther into the doorway, blocking the view. "You have a warrant." Reed smiled without humor. "You always ask so many questions before handing over thieves. You always ride through a storm on a rich man's word." The smile vanished. One of the riders behind Reed shifted in his saddle. Caleb recognized him then as one of Roy Haskett's grain hands from the dugout. The third rider kept his face low, but the shape of him was wrong for law. This was not official business. This was a net thrown in the dark. Caleb's grip tightened on the lantern. Deputy Reed looked over Caleb's shoulder again. "Miss Whitcomb, you come out now, this stays polite." Clara rose before Caleb could tell her not to. The blanket slipped from her knees. She stood in the lantern light, pale but straight, her dress damp at the hem from the day's ride, her hair loosened by wind and worry. She looked smaller inside the old shack, but Caleb had already learned that Clara's courage did not show itself by size. "I have my father's letter," she said, "and my mother's ring. They were hidden in my trunk. Roy Haskett has no claim to either." Deputy Reed's eyes narrowed. "A letter can be forged. So can a debt paper." The words cracked through the rain like a branch breaking. Caleb glanced back at her, pride moving through him despite the danger. Reed did not like it. Men like him expected fear to bend women before truth could stand. He pushed his slicker back just enough for the star to catch the lantern glow. "I'm giving you one last chance. Hand over the pouch." Clara's breathing quickened. Caleb set the lantern on a nail by the doorway. "You're not searching her. You're not taking her papers. And you're not dragging anyone out of this shack because Roy Haskett got scared of a dead man's handwriting." The grain hand behind Reed muttered, "Told you he'd make trouble." Reed lifted a hand to silence him. The rain grew harder. For one long moment, no one moved. Then lightning flashed across the sky, white and wide. In that burst of light, Caleb saw the third rider clearly. Not a deputy. Not a grain hand. It was Roy Haskett himself. He sat back in the rain with his collar turned up, his smooth face tight with anger. He had come in person, not because the pouch was stolen, but because he feared what might be inside it. Clara saw him too. A cold strength settled over her face. "Roy," she called, stepping closer to Caleb's shoulder but not hiding behind it. "If you believe that hill is yours, why are you afraid of one old letter?" Roy urged his horse forward. "I'm afraid of nothing, Clara. I'm trying to save you from making your situation worse." "My situation," she said, "is that you lied." Roy laughed once, sharp and false. "You think a daughter's memory can stand against a signed note? I think my father knew you would try this." Rain ran down Roy's face. His polite mask was gone now, washed clean by storm and fury. "Your father owed more than he ever admitted. He smiled like an honest settler and begged credit like every other broken sod man. I kept your family alive." Clara flinched, but she did not step back. Caleb heard the cruelty in that sentence. It was not enough for Roy to steal the land. He wanted Clara grateful for the rope around her neck. "You sold him flour," Caleb said. "You didn't buy his child." Roy's gaze snapped to him. "This is not your concern." "It became my concern when you sent men after her in the rain." "I sent the law." Caleb looked at Deputy Reed. "No, you rented a badge." Reed's face darkened. He swung down from his horse, boots sinking into mud. The grain hand followed. Roy stayed mounted but close enough to watch. Caleb stepped outside into the rain. Clara reached for his sleeve but stopped before touching him. "Caleb." He looked back. "Stay inside." "No." The answer came fast, fierce. He turned fully toward her. She stood framed by lantern light, her hand over the pouch, eyes bright with fear and decision. "If I stay hidden every time he comes, he wins a little more." Caleb's jaw worked once, then he gave a small nod. Together, they stepped into the rain. Deputy Reed came within 10 feet, holding out his hand. "Pouch." Clara lifted her chin. "No." "Then I'll take it." "No, you won't," Caleb said. The grain hand moved to Caleb's left, trying to circle. Caleb saw it without turning. He had spent too many years reading cattle, storms, and foolish men not to know when something meant to bolt. "No one needs to get hurt," Caleb said. Roy barked a laugh. "Listen to him pretending he's the peaceable sort. You always were good at standing noble while others paid the price, Mercer." Caleb's eyes shifted. Roy smiled, sensing he had touched something. "That brother of yours, Nathan, wasn't it? Folks still say you had the rope in your hand." The rain seemed to stop for one heartbeat. Clara looked at Caleb. His face had gone very still. Roy continued, voice smooth now, cruel in a quieter way. Funny thing, a man who couldn't save his own blood now trying to save a baker from a paper. Caleb did not move. But Clara did. She stepped forward until the rain struck her face and shoulders. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through every sound around them. Do not speak his brother's name. Roy blinked. Clara's hands trembled, but she did not hide them. You think shame is a rain you can throw over every person. You tried it on me with debt. You tried it on the town with gossip. Now you try it on him with grief. But grief is not guilt just because you can twist it in your mouth. Caleb looked at her, as if the lantern had moved inside his chest. No one had ever defended that wound for him. Not like that. Not with anger that did not pity him. Deputy Reed reached suddenly for Clara's arm. Caleb moved. He caught Reed's wrist before it touched her, not rough enough to break but firm enough to stop. Reed tried to pull free and failed. The grain hand lunged, slipped in mud and caught Caleb hard in the shoulder. Caleb turned with the force, letting the man's own weight carry him past. The man fell to one knee, cursing. Enough, Caleb said. His voice was low, but something in it made even the rain feel quiet. Reed stared at his trapped wrist, then at Caleb's face, and understood that pushing farther would make him look smaller than he already was. Roy's horse sidestepped nervously. From the road beyond the trees came another sound. Wagon wheels. Lanterns. Voices. Deputy Reed turned, startled. Roy's face tightened. A wagon rolled toward the line shack, followed by two riders. Sheriff Tom Lane sat on the front bench beside Miss Addie Cole, the schoolteacher, who held a lantern high in both hands. Behind them rode Mr. Miller and a young man from the telegraph office. Caleb released Reed's wrist and stepped back. Sheriff Lane climbed down slowly, rain dripping from his hat. His eyes moved over the scene. Reed in the mud, Haskett mounted in the shadows, Clara and Caleb standing side by side, the pouch still in Clara's hand. Well, the sheriff said, this looks less official than I was told. Roy forced a smile. Sheriff, we found them carrying stolen documents. Miss Addie Cole spoke before Lane could answer. No, Mr. Haskett, you told Deputy Reed they were carrying stolen documents. There is a difference. Roy glared at her. This is county business. It became school business when you tried to stop the bread order for my children's social, unless I signed a statement against Miss Whitcomb, Addie said. Clara stared at her. The schoolteacher's face was pale but determined. I did not sign it. Then I went to Sheriff Lane. Mr. Miller stepped forward, holding a wet ledger under his coat. And I brought my account books. Clara paid Haskett's flour debt through my store twice because he claimed the first payment never reached him. I should have spoken sooner. Shame bent his voice. Roy's expression turned dangerous. You all think a few town tales can undo legal paper. Sheriff Lane looked at Clara. Miss Whitcomb, do you have your father's letter? Clara hesitated. Caleb spoke softly beside her. Your choice. That mattered. She pulled the note from the pouch and handed it to the sheriff, keeping her mother's ring closed in her fist. Sheriff Lane read the letter under Miss Addie's lantern. The rain blurred the edges of the night. Everyone waited. When he finished, he looked toward Roy. Samuel Whitcomb names Elijah Boone and Mary Ellen Boone as holding proof. Roy scoffed, a dead man's desperate scribbling. Maybe, Sheriff Lane said. That's why I'm riding with them to find out. Roy's face changed. You can't leave town on a private errand. I can investigate a disputed land claim tied to possible fraud. Deputy Reed backed away a half step. Sheriff Lane looked at him. And I can ask why a deputy outside his jurisdiction is chasing a woman through a storm without a warrant. Reed said nothing. Roy leaned forward in the saddle. You do this, Lane, and you will regret it. The sheriff's tired eyes hardened. Roy, I started regretting things when I delivered that eviction notice. For a moment, the whole night held its breath. Then Roy turned his horse with a violent pull of the reins. 7 days, Clara, he called over his shoulder. Bring all the lanterns and witnesses you like. Paper wins in court. He rode into the rain, Deputy Reed and the Grain Hand following like shadows dragged behind him. Only when they were gone did Clara's strength begin to leave her. Her shoulders shook once. She turned away quickly, but Caleb saw. He did not touch her in front of everyone. He only stepped close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. Sheriff Lane folded the note and returned it carefully. We ride at first light. If Mary Ellen Boone has proof, we bring it back. If she doesn't, we keep digging. Clara nodded. Miss Addie came forward and took Clara's wet hands in hers. The children still want the bread, she said softly, and so do I. It was such a small sentence after such a hard night, but Clara nearly cried because of it. By the time everyone settled under the shelter of the lined shack and wagon canvas, the storm had softened. Caleb stood outside near the horses, letting rain cool the anger Roy had stirred in him. Clara came to stand beside him. For a while neither spoke. Then she said, what he said about Nathan was cruel. Yes. Was it true? Caleb closed his eyes once, part of it. She looked at him. Then hear the part I know. You threw too late because the water was faster than your hands. That is not the same as failing him. His breath left slowly. In the dark his hand found hers, not in a rush, not with demand, just fingers brushing then closing around hers. Clara let him. Above them, the last rain fell from the cottonwood leaves. And far south, in a lonely farmhouse near the Platte, an old woman named Mary Ellen Boone sat awake beside a cold stove, staring at a locked wooden box she had not opened in 12 years. Because that very morning, Roy Haskett's man had come asking for it. By first light, the storm had emptied itself over the prairie and left the world washed clean. Grass shone silver under the early sun. Water dripped from the line shack roof. The road south lay soft and dark, with wagon ruts full of sky. Clara Whitcomb stood beside Caleb Mercer's bay gelding, tying the pouch with her father's letter and mother's ring deep inside her dress pocket. Her fingers moved carefully, but her eyes kept turning toward the north, toward Cottonwood Rise. 7 days had become 6. By sunset it would be 5. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. Sheriff Tom Lane tightened the cinch on his horse, while Miss Addie Cole packed the last of the bread into a cloth sack. Mr. Miller had ridden back toward Red Willow before dawn to open the mercantile and keep his ears open for any move Roy Haskett might make. The young telegraph clerk had gone with him, carrying a short message to send ahead to the Platte settlement, asking after Mary Ellen Boone. Caleb came around the horse and saw Clara looking north. We will get back, he said. She touched the saddle leather, not looking at him. I keep seeing his men at the dugout, taking apart the oven brick by brick. They won't. You can't promise that. No, Caleb said, but I can promise they'll answer for it if they do. Clara finally looked at him. I don't want answer after, I want to stop before. So do I. The quiet honesty steadied her more than false comfort would have. They rode south in a small line, Caleb and Clara at the front, Sheriff Lane behind them, and Miss Addie driving the wagon because she had refused to turn back after coming this far. She sat stiff-backed on the bench, bonnet tied firmly, hands tight on the reins. No one ever tells schoolteachers when a matter is too hard, she had said. They only bring us the children after the hard matter is done. I'm coming. No one argued after that. The road to the Platte settlement was long and lonely. It crossed low prairie-skirted willow-choked creek beds and passed two abandoned homestead shacks with roofs fallen inward. The land looked open, but Clara knew better now. Paper could hide under floorboards. Lies could hide in ledgers. Men could hide greed behind polished boots and official stamps. Near noon, they reached a ridge overlooking the Platte bottoms. Cottonwoods thickened along the river. Smoke rose from 3 farmhouses scattered among fields of corn and squash. A little white church sat beyond a bend in the road, its bell tower leaning slightly, as if tired of watching people make the same mistakes over generations. Sheriff Lane pointed. Boone Place should be that house near the elm windbreak. Clara's heart began to pound. The house was small but sound, with a fenced garden and a row of jars shining in the window. A black mare stood tied near the porch. Not a farm horse. A rider's horse, sleek and impatient, saddle still on. Caleb saw it too. He reined in. Someone's there. Sheriff Lane's hand went to his coat, not to draw, only to remember where his authority rested. We ride slow. They approached without hurry. A woman stepped onto the porch before they reached the yard. She was perhaps 50, thin as a fence rail, with iron-gray hair pulled tight at the back of her head. She wore a plain brown dress and held a kitchen knife in one hand, low against her skirt where a careless man might miss it. Her eyes found Clara first. For a moment, the woman looked as if she had seen a ghost. "Mary Ellen Boone," Sheriff Lane called. The woman did not answer him. She looked only at Clara. "You have Samuel's eyes." Clara's throat closed. She dismounted so quickly her skirt caught on the saddle horn. Caleb reached to free it, then stepped back. Clara walked to the porch with her hands open. "I'm Clara Whitcomb." Mary Ellen Boone's face changed. Grief, memory, and fear moved through it one after another. "I knew this day would come," she said. From inside the house, something scraped. Caleb turned his head. Mary Ellen's fingers tightened around the knife. Sheriff Lane stepped down from his horse. "Ma'am, who is inside?" Mary Ellen's mouth pressed thin. "A man who says he came from Haskett Milling." Clara stopped at the foot of the porch. Caleb moved before anyone else did, crossing the yard in 3 long strides. He did not rush into the house. He stood to the side of the open door and listened. Inside, a man cursed under his breath. Then a crash sounded, wood striking floor. Mary Ellen flinched. "My father's box." Sheriff Lane climbed the porch. "Name of the man." "Garrick Voss," she said, "one of Haskett's collectors." Caleb looked to the sheriff. Lane nodded once. Caleb pushed the door open. The front room smelled of dust, old medicine, and spilled lamp oil. A gray-bearded man lay in a bed near the stove, thin and sleeping, his breath rough but steady. Beside a cupboard, a broad man in a wet coat stood over a broken drawer with a small wooden box tucked under one arm. He froze when he saw Caleb and Sheriff Lane. "Put it down," Lane said. Garrick Voss looked toward the window. Caleb shifted one step, blocking the quickest path. "Bad idea." Voss forced a laugh. "I was asked to collect private property." "From a sick man's house," Sheriff Lane said. "That business." Mary Ellen stepped into the doorway behind them, knife still low at her side. "My father owes Roy Haskett nothing." Voss's eyes flicked to the knife, then to Clara. "That her?" No one answered. He smiled then, mean and knowing. "Haskett said she'd come looking pitiful." Caleb's face hardened, but Clara stepped into the room before anger could speak for her. She looked at the box under Voss's arm. "My father trusted the Boones with something," she said. "That belongs with me." Voss hugged the box tighter. "Then take it up with Mr. Haskett." Sheriff Lane's voice turned cold. "You are standing in my presence with property taken from this house after being told to leave. Put the box down or I'll carry you back to Red Willow in irons." Voss looked from the sheriff to Caleb, measuring the room. He was the sort of man used to frightening widows and clerks, not standing before two men who would rather not fight but were fully prepared to end the foolishness. Slowly, he set the box on the table. Then he raised both hands. The breath Clara had been holding left her. Mary Ellen went to the bed and touched the old man's shoulder. "Papa." Elijah Boone stirred. His eyes opened cloudy and pale. He turned his head toward the voices, blinking as if pulling himself from a far place. "Mary," he rasped. "I'm here. The box. It's safe." At the word safe, his eyes moved weakly around the room. They passed over Caleb, the sheriff, Miss Addie at the doorway, then stopped near Clara. He stared. "Samuel's girl," he whispered. Clara stepped closer to the bed. "Yes, sir." The old man's mouth trembled. "Took you long enough." A broken laugh rose in Mary Ellen and turned into a sob. Clara knelt beside the bed. "My father said you could help me." Elijah Boone lifted a shaking hand toward the box. Mary Ellen brought it to him and fitted a little iron key from a chain around her neck into the lock. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside were folded maps, a survey note, a wax seal cracked but still attached to a county copy, and a page wrapped in oilcloth. Mary Ellen unfolded the oilcloth and handed it to Clara. It was the deed. Not a memory, not a rumor, not a dying man's hope. A deed, marked and witnessed, naming Samuel Whitcomb and his heirs as rightful holders of Cottonwood Rise and the spring line east of the dry creek. Clara stared at the page until the letters blurred. Caleb stood behind her, silent. He wanted to place a hand on her shoulder, but he let the moment belong first to her, her father, and the old man who had kept faith through 12 years of silence. Elijah Boone breathed with effort. "Haskett came after it when your father died, said debts made it his. Samuel feared the courthouse copy would vanish, so he brought me that. Told me if anything happened, keep it from Haskett and from frightened hands. I kept it, but I'm old now, too old." "You kept it long enough," Clara whispered. The old man turned his cloudy eyes toward Sheriff Lane. "I witnessed no pledge of that hill, no sale, no transfer. If Roy's got paper, it's a lie wearing ink." Sheriff Lane took off his hat. "Can you swear that before the county judge?" Elijah's mouth twitched. "If my bones hold together." Mary Ellen wiped her eyes. "They will." Garrick Voss shifted near the wall. Sheriff Lane looked at him. "You will ride back with me tied or untied, your choice." Voss said nothing. Miss Addie stepped into the room and touched Clara's back gently. "You have it," she said. Clara looked down at the deed in her lap. For years, she had thought she lived on the edge of town because no one had made room for her anywhere else. Now she understood. She had been standing on something men wanted badly enough to make her feel small until she walked away from it. A strange calm came over her. She folded the deed with care. "I want to go home," she said. Caleb looked at Sheriff Lane. "How fast can we return?" "Fast enough to make court tomorrow afternoon if we ride hard." Mary Ellen shook her head. "Not with my father in a wagon. He cannot take that road at speed." Elijah coughed, then gave a dry, stubborn sound that might once have been a laugh. "I have ridden worse trails drunker than this." "Papa," Mary Ellen warned. He ignored her. "Bring the wagon close, pad it well. If I die on the way, carry me into court anyway. I've waited 12 years to call Roy Haskett a liar to his face." For the first time all day, Caleb laughed softly. Even Clara smiled through tears. They spent an hour preparing. Mary Ellen packed blankets around Elijah in the wagon bed. Sheriff Lane tied Garrick Voss's hands and put him on his own horse with a lead rope. Miss Addie tucked the deed inside a book to keep it flat and dry. Caleb checked every strap twice. Before they left, Clara stood in Mary Ellen's kitchen holding her mother's ring. "Did you know her?" Clara asked. Mary Ellen's eyes softened. "Your mother? Yes." She had a laugh that made men stop arguing just to hear it. Clara looked down. "I'm losing the sound of her voice." Mary Ellen took her hand. "Then borrow this until memory gives you more. She used to say, 'Bread rises best when the room is warm and the hands are patient.'" Clara closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost hear it. If you have stayed with Clara this far, tell me in the comments whether you think Red Willow will stand with her now, or whether fear of Roy Haskett will win one more time. They rode north under a sky turning gold. Hope traveled with them, but so did danger. Because in Red Willow, Roy Haskett had stopped waiting on papers. By late afternoon, his men were already at Cottonwood Rise, loading Clara's split wood into a wagon and prying the first brick loose from her oven. And tied to the dugout door was a fresh notice that read, "Property seized before judgment due to suspected abandonment." By the time Clara Whitcomb saw the smoke line of Cottonwood rise again, the sun had already dropped low enough to turn the prairie the color of old brass. She had held herself together across miles of hard road. She had sat in the wagon beside Elijah Boone when the jolts hurt his bones, and Mary Ellen pressed a damp cloth to his brow. She had listened to Sheriff Lane question Garrick Voss, who answered little and sweated much. She had watched Caleb ride ahead, then fall back, then ride ahead again, always scanning the horizon as if he could feel trouble moving before he saw it. But when the cottonwood tree came into view, Clara's breath changed. Something was wrong. The smoke was not from her oven. Her oven smoke rose clean and thin, carrying the smell of wood and bread. This smoke was lower, darker, and dirty. Caleb saw it too. His hand tightened on the reins. "Stay with the wagon." Clara's eyes flew to him. "No." He looked back at her. There was no time for argument, and perhaps he knew by now that telling Clara to stay behind when her home was at stake was like telling dawn not to rise. So he only said, "Then stay close." They crested the last rise together. Clara stopped breathing. Roy Haskett's men had turned her yard into a wound. The split wood she had stacked carefully for winter lay scattered, half of it loaded into a wagon. Her door stood open. Her mother's shawl hung from one hinge where someone had thrown it. The crate table was outside in the dirt. Clothes, letters, flour sacks, and broken dishes lay in a careless heap near the dugout entrance. And the oven. For one sick moment, Clara could not understand what she was seeing. The clay mouth had been cracked open. Several bricks were missing from the side. One man stood with a pry bar raised, working at the place where she had smoothed clay with her own hands after her parents died. The sound of brick scraping brick went through her like a cry. "No," she whispered. Then she was off the wagon before anyone could stop her. Caleb swung down at the same time and moved with her. Sheriff Lane shouted behind them, his voice hard, but Clara barely heard. All she saw was the oven, the door, the pieces of her life lying in dirt. Roy Haskett stood near the dugout with a paper in his hand and satisfaction on his face. He turned as Clara crossed the yard. "Well," he said, "the runaway returns." Clara did not look at him. She ran to the oven and put both hands on the damaged clay, as if she could hold it together by touch alone. The man with the pry bar stepped back, uneasy now. Her palms moved over the broken place. The clay was still warm from the day's sun. A dark crack ran along the curve. She remembered building it alone, mixing clay with straw until her arms shook, firing it too hot the first time and crying when one side split. She had patched it then. She had learned. She had made it stronger. Roy walked toward her. "You abandoned the property." Clara turned slowly. Dust clung to her skirt. Her face was pale, but her eyes held something Roy had never seen there before. Not panic, not shame, not pleading. "Witness." "I want to find proof," she said. Roy lifted his paper. "And I took lawful steps before you could hide what belongs to my company." Sheriff Lane stepped into the yard. "Roy, tell your men to drop those tools." Roy's smile faltered when he saw who followed. Mary Ellen Boone climbed down from the wagon, face tight with anger. Miss Addie Cole came beside her, carrying the book with the deed tucked inside. Behind them, Elijah Boone lay propped among blankets in the wagon bed, eyes open, face gray but stubborn. Garrick Voss sat tied on his horse near the road, watched by one of the sheriff's borrowed riders. Roy stared at Elijah. For the first time since Clara had known him, Roy Haskett looked afraid. Only for a second. Then he covered it with contempt. "You dragged a dying old man across the county for theater." Elijah Boone raised one thin hand from the wagon, still less theater than forging a dead man's debt. The yard went silent. One of Roy's men lowered the pry bar. Sheriff Lane walked to him and took it from his hands. "All of you, step away from the oven." Roy snapped, "This is my property under claim." "Under disputed claim," Sheriff Lane said, "and you were ordered to wait for review." "She abandoned it." "She left for 2 days with witnesses and with her business still active," Miss Addie said. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "Half the town bought bread from this oven yesterday. Do not call that abandoned." Roy glared at her. "Schoolteachers should stay at school." "And grain men should stay out of women's trunks," she answered. Caleb almost smiled, but Clara did not. She stood beside the damaged oven with her hands curled, not in fists for fighting, but as if holding herself back from falling apart. Roy pointed at Caleb. "This is your doing. You stirred her up. Before you came, she understood her place." Caleb stepped forward. Clara touched his arm. He stopped. Then she walked past him and faced Roy herself. "My place," she said, "is not something you assign." Roy's jaw tightened. Clara's voice grew clearer. "My place is where my father dug into this hill with his own hands. My place is where my mother baked the first ash cakes before there was a stove. My place is where I built that oven after burying them both. And my place is not yours because you waited for me to become tired enough to leave." The words carried across the yard. A wagon rattled up the road from town. Then another. Mr. Miller had returned, and with him came Mrs. Bell, the blacksmith and his wife, the telegraph clerk, 2 ranch hands from the Bar M, and several townspeople who had heard enough rumors to follow the truth home. They slowed at the sight of Clara's belongings in the dirt. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. Mr. Miller's face went dark with shame. Roy saw the crowd gathering and lifted his voice. "You people are being fooled by sentiment. I have a signed debt transfer from Samuel Whitcomb." "Show it," Caleb said. The same 2 words he had spoken days before came back sharper now. This time, Roy had an audience. He looked at Sheriff Lane. "It is in my office." "No," Clara said. Everyone turned to her. She held out her hand. "You brought papers to nail to my door. You brought men to tear my oven apart. You would not come here empty of the one paper that lets you do it. Show it." Roy's face changed in small ways, a twitch near his mouth, a blink too slow, a breath held too long. Caleb saw it, so did Sheriff Lane. "Roy," the sheriff said, "show the paper." Roy hesitated, then pulled a folded document from inside his coat. He held it toward Sheriff Lane, not Clara. The sheriff took it and opened it. Miss Addie brought the deed from the book and held it beside him. Mary Ellen stood close, her eyes fixed on the ink. Elijah Boone called weakly from the wagon, "Read the witness names." Sheriff Lane read. The debt transfer claimed Samuel Whitcomb had pledged Cottonwood Rise, the dugout, oven rights, and spring line to Hasket Milling in settlement of grain debt. It bore Samuel's signature and 2 witness marks. Elijah coughed. Names. Sheriff Lane looked at the bottom. Peter Vale and Amos Reed. A murmur moved through the yard. Deputy Amos Reed. Caleb's face hardened. Mary Ellen leaned closer. Peter Vale died the winter before Samuel Whitcomb. Roy snapped. People misremember dates. Mr. Miller stepped forward, opening his old ledger with trembling hands. No, I have funeral supply entries. Coffee, sugar, black cloth ordered for Vale's burial, dated February. This paper is dated June. The murmur grew louder. Sheriff Lane looked at Roy. You want to explain how a dead man witnessed this? Roy's face had gone red. Clerical error. Elijah Boone laughed, then coughed until Mary Ellen steadied him. Then explain Amos Reed. He was 16 that year and living in Ellery Crossing. He never met Samuel Whitcomb till after the burial. Sheriff Lane folded the paper slowly. That deputy came after Miss Whitcomb last night with no warrant. Roy's eyes moved over the crowd, searching for someone still afraid enough to stand with him. No one stepped forward. Not even his own men. Clara stood very still. She could feel the shift happening around her. For years, Roy had used people's silence as shelter. Now, one by one, that shelter was pulling away. Mrs. Bell came into the yard, lifted Clara's mother's shawl from the door hinge, and held it carefully in both hands. I should have come sooner, she said, her voice thick. Clara looked at her, unable to answer. The blacksmith stepped toward the damaged oven and touched the missing brick. I can brace this tonight. His wife nodded, and I can help clean the dugout. Mr. Miller closed his ledger. I'll testify to the payments. Miss Addie held the deed firmly. I'll testify about the statement Roy wanted from me. Mary Ellen looked at Sheriff Lane. My father will testify, even if we have to carry his bed into court. Elijah lifted one finger. Make it a chair. I'd like to look him in the eye. A few people laughed softly, not from humor alone, but from relief. Roy backed one step. Caleb saw it and moved just enough to block the road without seeming to. Where are you going? To bring my lawyer, Roy said. Sheriff Lane held up the forged paper. You can bring him to the jail first. I have enough to hold you until the judge reviews this. You can't arrest me in front of my own men. Sheriff Lane looked around. Your men appear busy deciding whether they want to be witnesses or defendants. The men near the oven dropped their tools completely. Roy's expression twisted. The careful grain man, the smooth creditor, the respectable businessman of Red Willow, cracked open in front of everyone. You think she'll thank you, he shouted, pointing at Clara. You think this town cares about her. They bought cheap bread and called it kindness. They'll forget her again when the next trouble comes. The words struck because there was some truth in them. Clara felt the crowd go quiet. Then she stepped forward. Maybe they will, she said, but I will not forget myself again. No one moved. She turned toward the townspeople, her voice carrying through dusk. I have lived under this hill for years. Some of you bought my bread, some of you pitied me. Some of you looked away because looking close would have cost you something. I cannot change that, but I can tell you this. Cottonwood Hearth bread is mine. This hill is mine. And from this day forward, no one buys from me with pity. If you want my bread, you pay fair. If you want my respect, you speak truth when it matters. Her eyes moved to Roy. And if you want me gone, bring more than fear. The silence after her words felt wide enough to hold the whole prairie. Then Caleb, standing beside the road, removed his hat. One by one, others did the same. Not applause, not cheers, something quieter and better. Respect. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitcomb stood in front of Red Willow and did not feel smaller than the town. Sheriff Lane took Roy by the arm. Roy jerked once, but no one helped him. As the sheriff led him toward the wagon, Roy leaned close enough for only Clara and Caleb to hear. "This isn't over," he whispered. Clara looked at him. "No, but it is no longer hidden." The sheriff took him away. Night came slowly after that. Lanterns were hung around the dugout yard. Women gathered Clara's letters and folded her clothes. The blacksmith and Caleb braced the oven with boards and clay. Miss Addie sorted the good flour from the spilled. Mrs. Bell washed the cracked blue cup and set it back on the crate table. It was such a small act that Clara had to turn away before tears came. Caleb found her near the Cottonwood after dark. She stood with her father's note in one hand and her mother's ring in the other, looking at the wounded oven. "It can be repaired," he said. "I know, but it will show the crack." Clara nodded. "Let it." Caleb looked at her. She slipped the ring back into the pouch. "I used to think being whole meant no one could see where life had broken you. Maybe it only means the broken place still holds heat." Caleb's chest tightened. He reached for her hand, slowly enough that she could refuse. She did not. His fingers closed around hers, warm and careful. "We go to court tomorrow," he said. "Yes. And after." She looked toward the dugout, the town wagons, the damaged oven, the people moving under lantern light. "After," she said softly, "I decide what kind of home I want to build from what is left." Caleb held her hand under the cottonwood, saying nothing, though his heart was full of things he had not earned the right to ask yet. Far off, a church bell rang the hour in Red Willow. And in the sheriff's wagon on the road to town, Roy Haskett sat with his hands bound, smiling into the dark. Because the forged paper had been found. But the real county record, the one damaged in the old stove fire, still held one secret no one had read. A secret that could change not only Clara's land, but Caleb Mercer's life as well. Morning came to Cottonwood Rise with hammer marks, ash dust, and the smell of coffee boiling over a tired fire. Clara Whitcomb had slept less than an hour. She woke sitting against the cottonwood trunk with her mother's shawl folded across her lap and her father's note tucked inside her bodice. Around her, the yard looked like a place that had survived a storm made by men instead of weather. Her belongings were gathered in careful piles. The dugout door hung straight again after Caleb, and the blacksmith worked past midnight to mend the hinge. The oven stood wounded but braced, its cracked side packed with fresh clay and held by boards until it could dry. The crack showed plainly. Clara looked at it for a long time. A week ago, the sight would have broken her. Now it seemed almost honest. The oven had been damaged but not ended. It still stood beneath the shelter, blackened around the mouth, warm in memory, ready to hold fire again when the clay cured. Like Clara herself, it had been struck where it was strongest, and still it remained. Mrs. Bell came over with a tin cup of coffee. She looked older in the early light, her neat bonnet missing, her hair escaping at the temples. "You should eat something before court," she said. Clara took the cup with both hands. "Thank you." Mrs. Bell lingered. "I wrapped your mother's letters in oilcloth, there on the crate table." Clara nodded. The older woman's eyes filled. "Clara, I have wanted to say something since last night." Clara looked up. Mrs. Bell folded her hands at her waist, the way she did in church when bracing herself for a hymn that reached too deep. "I called it concern when it was cowardice. I let Roy speak about you because standing against him would have made trouble for me. I am ashamed of that." Clara stared into the coffee. For years, she had imagined someone saying those words. She had imagined feeling powerful when they came. Instead, she felt tired. "I needed neighbors," Clara said softly, "not pity." Mrs. Bell bowed her head. "I know." Clara looked toward the damaged oven. "Then be one now." The older woman wiped her cheek and nodded. "I will." That was all there was to it. No grand forgiveness, no warm embrace, just truth placed on the table between them, plain and useful as bread. By 7 o'clock, they started for town. Clara rode beside Caleb at the front, wearing her cleanest blue dress, the one with patches so neat they looked almost decorative if a person did not look too close. Her hair was pinned tight. Her mother's ring rested in the pouch at her waist. The deed lay inside Miss Addie's schoolbook. Elijah Boone rode in the wagon, propped in blankets with a quilt around his knees and his stubborn chin lifted toward the road. "Don't jolt me too much," he called. "I aim to arrive alive and insulting." Mary Ellen sighed, "Papa." But even Sheriff Lane smiled. The courthouse in Red Willow was not large. It stood beside the church with a flagpole out front and dust gathered on every windowsill. By the time Clara's group arrived, half the town had gathered outside. Word had spread before sunrise. Some came for justice. Some came for curiosity. Some came because they had eaten Clara's bread and found they could no longer pretend not to know her name. Roy Haskett arrived in Sheriff Lane's custody, cleaned up enough to look respectable from a distance. His coat was brushed. His hair was combed. His hands were no longer tied, though the sheriff stood close. Roy held his face calm, but his eyes moved quickly over the crowd. He was counting support. He found little. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of old wood, ink, and damp wool. Judge Abram Whitford sat behind the bench, heavy-browed and sharp-eyed, a man known for impatience with fools and no patience at all for paper that wasted his morning. Clara sat at a front bench between Mary Ellen and Miss Addie. Caleb stood along the wall behind her. He wanted to sit beside her, but this was her fight first. He would stand where she could look back and find him if she needed. She did look back once. He gave her the smallest nod. It was enough. Judge Whitford called the matter forward. Roy's lawyer, a thin man with nervous hands, began with a polished speech about debt, proper transfer, abandonment, and the hardship of honest businesses when settlers failed to meet obligations. He used Clara's name only twice. Mostly, he spoke of property, claim, procedure, and risk. Clara listened, with both hands folded in her lap. Once, those words might have made her feel small. Now they made her angry. Then Sheriff Lane presented the seized transfer paper. Mr. Miller opened his ledger and showed the date of Peter Vale's burial. Mary Ellen testified that her father had held the deed since Samuel Whitcomb's final illness. Miss Addie testified that Roy had pressured her to sign a statement against Clara. Garrick Voss, after one hard look from the judge, admitted he had been sent to Mary Ellen's house to retrieve the boon box before Clara could reach it. Roy stared straight ahead. His calm began to crack only when Elijah Boone was carried in on a chair. Two men brought him forward, and the old surveyor looked pleased by the attention despite his pain. His eyes were clouded, but his voice, when he swore his oath, was dry and clear. Judge Whitford leaned forward. "Mr. Boone, do you recognize the original deed?" Mary Ellen placed it in his hands. Elijah touched the seal with one bent finger. "I do." "Did you witness Samuel Whitcomb's claim?" "I surveyed it. I marked the spring line. I watched him file. That hill belongs to Samuel Whitcomb and his heirs." "And did you ever witness a debt transfer giving that land to Haskett Milling?" Elijah turned his head toward Roy. "No, and if that paper says I did, then that paper lies prettier than the man holding it." A low sound moved through the courtroom. Judge Whitford struck the bench once, quiet. But his mouth twitched. Roy's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, the courthouse copy from that year was damaged in the stove fire. The county record is unclear." The judge looked down at the old record book open before him. "Yes, I see water marks, smoke damage, missing edges." He turned a page carefully. "But not all is lost." The room went still. Clara felt Caleb shift behind her. Judge Whitford adjusted his spectacles and read from the damaged page. Samuel Whitcomb, Cottonwood Rise. Filing recorded with witness Elijah Boone and secondary witness Nathaniel Mercer. Caleb's head lifted. Clara turned toward him. For a moment, he looked as if the floor had moved under his boots. The judge continued. Nathaniel Mercer signed as freight witness, delivering survey stakes and filing notice. Caleb stepped forward before he knew he had moved. "Your Honor," he said, voice rough, "may I see that page?" Judge Whitford studied him. "You are." "Caleb Mercer. Nathaniel was my brother." The courtroom quieted differently now. Not with suspense, with recognition of grief. The judge nodded to the clerk, who carried the book carefully to Caleb. Caleb looked down at the faded ink. There it was. Nathaniel Mercer. The letters were young, bold, slightly crooked. Nathan had never written a line without leaning too hard on the pen. Caleb remembered teasing him for it at the ranch table. He remembered Nathan laughing and saying a mark should look like a man meant to leave it. Caleb's throat closed. All these years he had remembered Nathan only by the creek that took him, the rope thrown too late, the water, the guilt. Now in a smoke-damaged county book his brother stood in another memory, not dying, not lost, helping a young family claim land, carrying survey stakes, signing as witness, leaving a mark that 12 years later helped save Clara's home. Caleb touched the page with one finger, but not on the ink. Clara watched him from the bench, tears burning in her eyes. The secret in the record did not destroy him. It gave something back. Judge Whitford's voice softened only slightly. "Mr. Mercer, do you affirm this is your brother's signature?" Caleb swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor, I know his hand." Roy stood suddenly. "This is sentiment. A dead boy's name on a burned page does not erase debt." Judge Whitford's eyes hardened. "Sit down, Mr. Haskett." Roy did not sit. "That woman owes me." Clara rose then. The room turned toward her. Her knees trembled, but her voice held. "I owed for flour," she said, "and I paid what I owed when I could. Mr. Miller's ledger shows that. My father owed for drought credit, and he paid what he could before he died. But I do not owe Mr. Haskett my hill. I do not owe him my oven. I do not owe him my name." She looked at the judge, then at the town behind her. "I have lived small because I thought small was safer. I let people call my work good while they called my life sad. I let fear make me quiet. But my parents did not dig into that hill for me to walk away because a man with ink told me to. Cottonwood Rise is my home. Cottonwood Hearth bread is my work. And I am asking the court to say what was always true." Judge Whitford leaned back. For a moment, only the tick of the wall clock sounded. Then he picked up the forged transfer paper and laid it beside the deed. "The alleged transfer is invalid pending criminal review for fraud, false witness, and unlawful seizure. The deed held by Mary Ellen and Elijah Boone, supported by surviving county record and witness testimony, confirms Cottonwood Rise belongs to Clara Whitcomb as heir to Samuel Whitcomb." Clara closed her eyes. The judge's voice continued. "Mr. Haskett will be held for further inquiry. Miss Whitcomb's property is to be restored. Damages to her oven, dwelling, and goods will be assessed. Court adjourned." The gavel struck. For half a second no one moved. Then the room breathed. Mary Ellen took Clara's hand. Miss Addie covered her mouth and cried openly. Mrs. Bell whispered, "Thank the Lord." Mr. Miller bowed his head as if the judgment had lifted a weight from his own back too. Caleb stood frozen near the record book. Clara went to him. He looked at her with eyes full of old pain and new wonder. "Nathan helped your father," he said. "Yes," Clara whispered. I thought all I had left of him was the day I lost him." She shook her head. "He left his mark before that." Caleb looked down, and the first tear Clara had ever seen on his face slid along the dust at his cheek. She took his hand in front of everyone. No one whispered. No one looked away. Outside the courthouse, Red Willow had changed, though not in the simple way stories sometimes pretend. Shame did not vanish in one morning. Cowardice did not become courage because a judge struck a gavel, but people saw Clara now. That was a beginning they could not undo. Roy was led away without a speech. He looked at Clara once as he passed, but there was nothing left in his stare that could make her lower her eyes. She did not hate him in that moment. She was too free. 3 weeks later, the oven at Cottonwood Rise burned again. Its crack remained visible, sealed with new clay and blackened by fresh fire. The blacksmith had rebuilt the damaged side stronger than before. Mr. Miller supplied flour at fair price. Mrs. Bell and the church women came every Thursday to help wrap loaves, not as charity, but for wages Clara insisted on paying when orders grew too many for one pair of hands. A sign hung from the oven shelter now, carved by Caleb with steadier letters than the first little stamp. Cottonwood Hearth bread. Clara kept the dugout. She did not move into the bar M, though Caleb asked nothing and offered much with his eyes. Instead, he helped her build a proper front room above the old dugout, with windows that caught morning light and a porch wide enough for cooling racks. The earth room remained beneath it, cool and strong, holding her mother's trunk, her father's note, and the first crooked C and H stamp. Some roots were not meant to be pulled up. They were meant to support what rose above them. One evening near the first frost, Caleb came to Cottonwood Rise with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Clara stood at the oven, sliding out the last loaves of the day. The sunset poured gold across the hill. Her hair was loose at her neck. Flour streaked one sleeve. She looked tired, warm, and more alive than he had ever seen her. "I brought something," he said. She smiled. "If it is more flour, you can stack it yourself." "It isn't flour." He unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a small wooden frame holding a copy of the county record page. Nathaniel Mercer's signature showed near the bottom, careful and bold despite the smoke stains. Clara touched the frame. "For the new room?" she asked. "For wherever you think it belongs." She looked at the signature, then at Caleb. "Your brother helped save my home before either of us knew it." Caleb nodded. Seems he was still throwing rope after all. Clara's eyes filled. He reached into his coat then and pulled out something else. Not a grand ring in a velvet box, not something polished from a city jeweler. It was a simple silver band made by the Red Willow blacksmith with a tiny wheat mark etched inside. Caleb held it in his palm, his hand steady but his voice quiet. "Clara, I did not come to your door looking for a wife. I came because of bread, and because some part of me knew anything made with that much care had a soul behind it worth knowing. I will not ask you to leave your hill. I will not ask you to become smaller so I can feel larger. I am asking if you will let me build beside you." The wind moved softly through the cottonwood leaves. Clara looked toward the oven, the dugout, the new porch, the sign, the land her parents had loved, and the man who had never once tried to take it from her in the name of saving her. Then she opened the pouch at her waist and took out her mother's ring. She placed it in Caleb's hand beside the silver band. "My mother's ring stays in this house," she said softly, "but yours can stay on my hand." Caleb's breath caught. He slid the silver band onto her finger. No crowd watched, no church bell rang, no judge declared it. Only the cottonwood leaves whispered above them and the cracked oven breathed warm behind her. Caleb bent and kissed her hand first. Then he kissed her mouth with the gentleness of a man who understood that love was not a claim. It was a place offered and accepted. Months later, people would still tell the story in Red Willow. They would say the richest rancher in the county once rode 10 miles because of a loaf of bread. They would say he asked half the town one question until it led him to a woman living under a hill. They would say she fought a grain man, saved her land, built a bakery, and made the whole county learn her name. But Clara knew the quieter truth. Caleb had not found her because she was hidden. He found her because, without knowing it, she had been leaving pieces of her heart on every table that held her bread. And one day, a lonely man tasted one and was brave enough to ask who made it. If this story touched your heart, like it and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, truth, and healing rise from the hardest ground. The last image of Cottonwood rise that autumn was simple. A cracked oven glowing in the sunset, a porch full of fresh bread, a cottonwood tree bending over the hill, Caleb Mercer standing beside Clara Whitcomb with one hand resting near hers, not holding her in place, only sharing the warmth. And Clara, once the woman everyone forgot, smiling as the first loaf of the evening came out golden, whole, and ready to feed the world that had finally learned her name.